Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome, Marilyn. You're, I think, our third visitor. So, managed to get out tonight amongst all the weather issues that are going on. So, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands upon which we are meeting and pay my respects to elders both past, present, and emerging. So, welcome to the 22nd of February 2022 Central Coast Council Ordinary Meeting. And I now declare the meeting open. Please note that the meeting is being webcast. I just remind any of those who are participating in the meeting, and we don't actually have any speakers tonight, so it's a little bit null and void. From a COVID point of view, just please for, I guess, another week, follow the health orders and keep your distance and so on. Make sure you wear your masks. Yes, I noticed that. It is actually extremely crowded, isn't it? I'm struggling to see people. But no, the weather has been somewhat atrocious, as I'm sure some of you can attest to. So I will just comment on that. Boris has made reference to me that there have been a number of issues out there, particularly I think in the more southern part of the Central Coast Council area. Certainly I noticed at home, which is in Bayview, we had 45 mil inside a couple of hours, so that's 2 inches in Old Speak, which is actually quite a lot of rain, I think, for a Sydney point of view. So I know there's been certainly issues. We've had Racecourse Road, I know, got flooded and closed, and I happen to think I know that Lucy Wicks, in actual fact, got caught in that, and she said the electrics in her car died. And I suppose most people should work out that electrics and water don't go well together. So look, it has caused some disruption, but it seems to be in a very, very abnormal weather event, and but by and large, I think the systems have coped well. We don't believe there's going to be any issues with the lakes, any of that, because the rainfall is short and sharp. It is not a continuous long downpours. So with a bit of luck, we'll get through it, but unfortunately, some people are going to have been inconvenienced during this period. So we are committed to continuing to deliver road drainage and pathway improvements across the Central Coast region. And we've got works going on in Del Monte Place, Copacabana, with road and drainage upgrades. We've got Daveston Road, Saratoga, road and drainage upgrades. We've got road and drainage upgrades at Lake Edge Avenue, Berkeley Vale, at Fowler Road Bridge, Tuggerah. We've got replacement of the existing timber bridge going on. And we've got more road upgrades and drainage improvement, pavement improvements in Louisiana Road, Hamlin Terrace, and View Street, north of Oka. So I note tonight that there is no open forum because we have no requests to speak from anybody in the community. We did have one request for somebody to speak in the public forum on item 2.11, which was the submission to the public exhibition of DP, the Department of Planning and Environment, new approach to rezoning. So unfortunately, that community representative was quite concerned, quite legitimately concerned about actually getting here and being stranded with water and so on. So they made a decision not to turn up. I'm hoping that we can have people able to come in and join the council in these things in such circumstances such as this by electronic means, but we weren't able to complete that for tonight. But hopefully in the future we will be able to. I'll move to item 1.1, which is disclosures of interest. I have no conflicts of interest to declare, so I don't believe any of the staff have, so I've got nobody putting their hand up, so we'll assume that that's all good. So I'll now resolve to adopt the resolution that is displayed on the screen. Item 1.2, confirmation of the minutes of the previous meeting. I can confirm that they are full and accurate, and I now resolve to adopt the resolution that's displayed on the screen. Item 1.3, notice of intention to deal with matters in closed session. I note that there are no matters in closed session, and therefore I resolve to adopt the thing as shown on the screen. Now I do have a couple of administrators' minutes tonight, which I will go through. The first one is an Administrator's Minute about development of a banner policy. I'm sure those who are present will recall the media coverage back on Australia Day, or around Australia Day, that reported that Central Coast Council had made the decision to not fly the Australia flag on Australia Day, as it may offend some people. This statement was incorrect and misleading, and the issue was actually about the installation of the Australian flag banner on West Street, Umina, for Australia Day. Local media outlets, and in fact national media, continue to report Central Coast Council not flying the Australian flag on Australia Day, when in fact that issue was about West Street and Umina. I can certainly vouch for the fact I carried out citizenship ceremony with approximately 160 people on Australia Day, and I can assure you the Australian flag and the Aboriginal flag were flying, and I can also assure you that each person who came to that got an Australian flag as well. I also wanted to make sure it's clear that the Central Coast Council have not been in possession of Australian flag banners since 2017 and currently do not hold Australian flag banners. So to actually get a request that the CEO and myself got from the president of the association on the peninsula there, Chamber of Commerce, that asking us to put the flags up the day before was clearly a political move and nothing more than that, since we did not even have flags to put up, should we have been able to do so. Now, when I look back into things there, the former Gosford City and the Wyong Shire councils, while having processes and so on in place, and they had banner policies drafted, but neither council actually progressed to a formal adoption of those policies. So what I would like to do is get a policy in place. We do currently have a program of banner installations in our town centres, and these banners currently comprise various designs which often acknowledge significant national occasions, including Anzac Day and NAIDOC Week, and they often acknowledge things such as local events such as the Ocean Beach Surf Club centenary. So as a result of the media's interest, and it is my view that Council needs to develop and implement a banner policy that aims to create a sense of community, promotes major arts, cultural activities and sporting events of public interest. The banner policy should represent the region's great diversity and outline the key fundamentals of the type of messages to be promoted to the community, including promoting local economic activity of special community-related events. The creation of banner policy will aim to reduce any ambiguity related to the subject matters of banners on display in town centres. There is no question the Central Coast LGA is made up of a great cultural and social diversity within its communities, and the display of banners in our town centres should represent and reflect that diversity. And I would also point out that this development of a banner policy is commonplace amongst other councils across the state. And also I'll just note that we are going to be providing banners in Umina and other town centres for Anzac Day in April that celebrate and acknowledge the significance of Anzac Day. I have heard it that we should be flying Australian flags then, and as I have to say, being both a proud Australian and a proud Kiwi, I would take a severe exception if it was only the Australian flag that was shown on a banner when... I'll leave that over to the community to decide on the feedback from the consultation. So moving forward, the Central Coast Council will be consulting with the community on the draft banner policy to ensure it encapsulates our diverse community and activities relevant to each of the town centres. I now want to formally move that 1, the Council CEO develops a draft Central Coast banner policy for all town centres that encapsulates our diverse community and activities related to each of our town centres, and that Council staff 2 place the draft banner policy on exhibition and provide a report back to Council for consideration no later than the July 2022 Ordinary Council meeting. I have a second Administrator's Minute, which is Advisory Groups and Committees Structure Discussion Paper. Back in March last year, Council did produce a report which Dick Person discussed at the Council meeting, and the purpose of that report was to achieve better outcomes and effectively manage the impact on Council resources as a result of the financial crisis by looking at proposed changes to the advisory groups and committees. So he resolved a number of resolutions, of which the third one was the Council develops a framework for management of advisory groups, working groups and networking groups for consideration by the new Council following the conduct of the 2021 local government elections. Well, of course, that didn't happen, and of course we have had a public inquiry and an order postponing the local government elections here through till at least June this year. Now, until such time as an elected body is returned to Council to consider a framework, I'd like to get a discussion paper developed to actually inform a future framework going forward. I believe there's a great opportunity to create some synergies, not only between subject matter expert groups, but all key stakeholder groups that are impacted by future projects that Council is progressing. And Council's trends right across have shown a tendency to move towards strategic reference groups rather than generalised committees, and or setting up committees for or reference groups for a specific purpose, which are then dissolved once that purpose is finished. It is pretty unclear to me, I've got to say, that current committee structure is whether the current committee structure is serving the purpose for which it was designed. More often than not, and we saw this come up with the trail bikes and environmental people and bikers and so on, I see issues that are raised that are either out of scope of the purpose of the committee it's established for, or an even stronger divide between key stakeholders on a particular issue, rather than working constructively together to resolve an issue. I am therefore left questioning the value and effectiveness of our current structures and potentially their relevance and structure going forward, particularly how they actually interact with the Council's strategic plans. And therefore I'm going to ask the Council to undertake the development of a discussion paper on the current committee structure, including, but not limited to, the governance arrangements, charters, length of term, membership and legislative requirements, if any, and provide a report back to Council. So, to be clear, I'm not cancelling anything at the moment. I'm getting a discussion paper out there to get a framework ready for a new Council to consider when they will have to think about these issues. So I want to formally move that, 1, the Council CEO develop a discussion paper on Council's advisory groups and committees, including but not limited to the framework, structure, governance arrangements, length of term, membership and legislative requirements, of any, and 2, that Council staff report the discussion paper to Council no later than May 2022. I'll now move on to item 2.1, which is the standard, if you like, 2021 Q2 review. So that's the October to December quarterly results. So the formal Q2 review has been carried out and is now publicly reported. So David, you might like to say some comments about that?
Just briefly, the quarterly review reviews our operational performance as well as our budgetary performance and resets the budget. Importantly to note is there are 66 actions in the operational plan, and of that 49 are completed or on track. 12 are delayed, primarily due to COVID. 1's not commenced, 3 are on hold and 1 closed. In terms of budget, and we'll talk a little bit more about financial performance when we get to the January financials. So this is based on the December financials, but readjusting the budget. Yet again, we're performing better than budget as at the 30th of December, and we've made a positive adjustment in the budget estimates from a $3 million surplus to a $6.3 million surplus. And that returns that surplus to almost the same number as the original budget. So we're confident that we will be able to return the small surplus that was forecast when we adopted the original budget, and hopefully we'll be able to perform a little bit better than that. One matter of note, and I guess of some concern, is There's a decrease in the Q2 CapEx budget of $12.3 million. Much of that is due to challenges in the supply chain due to COVID, not only being able to deploy local resources, but the availability of materials and specialist resources externally due to the worldwide disruption in supply chains due to COVID. So there has been a reduction in the capital budget of $12.3 million.
Thank you, Mr. Farmer. Yeah, it's a good result. And yes, we are a little bit behind, but I think I'm correct in saying that's partially due to COVID and weather and other reasons. So there is some rationale as to why we're running a little bit late, but hopefully we'll be able to catch up if the weather ever finds up. Just something that, just as a generalised comment for those who have and do follow closely the financial situation, you will see a different set of numbers, or slightly different set of numbers, in the quarterly report as opposed to the previous monthly report. And the reason for that is principally in the income ebb. Under the local government reporting situation, we must put all the revenue from the rates up front, and then, if you like, we take the costs off throughout the year. That is not an accurate way, in my opinion, and I know David agrees with me. It is not an accurate way to represent how the organisation is travelling. So our monthly report actually divides that rates income into monthly instalments, which we show monthly. So therefore what you see is a true position with the amount of money that is due for that point in time in the revenue side and from the rates, and the costs are as they are for that period. So you get a true indication of how we're performing. So if anyone wants to try and compare the two, it might look a bit odd, but that's the reasoning behind that. Well, now, with that, I'm going to adopt the resolution that's shown on the screen and adopt that Q2 business report for 21-22 year, including the forecast results, which, as the CEO mentioned, are pretty much back on track now. Item 2.2, which is the investment report. Ms. Cowley, I think there's some more quite good news in this one as well, or continues to be good news, I should say.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. Yes, there are some really good news, and maybe if we can ask for the PowerPoint to come through. Thank you. If we go to the next page, we can see that the investment portfolio total has decreased a little bit from 587 to 580. That is expected as a result of the awaiting to receive some more of our normal rates that happened during the month. If we go to the next slide, we would see that once again this month we have been able to cover the unrestricted negative deficit balances in the water fund and the drainage fund, which amount to $44 million out of the $57 million of unrestricted funds available in the general fund. And if we go on to the next slide, the good news there again is that the benchmark bank bill swap index of 0.48% has been once again performed better on behalf of council by 0.97%, and so our investment return is performing as we expect and much better than what the benchmark rate is. Thank you, Mr. Administrator.
Just out of interest, Ms. Kelly, what sort of interest do we earn per annum in total dollars, roughly?
Roughly, I would say about 10 to $15 million.
Yeah, that's good, eh? Much better in our pocket than somebody else's. So with that, again, our position is looking pretty sound in terms of unrestricted cash, and at the moment that's able to currently fund the two deficits in both the water and in the drainage restricted area. So hopefully we can continue with that, but I am aware that that number can fluctuate and can go up and down. And as I mentioned just before, we do tend to collect a lot of the revenue for rates more upfront than later on, and therefore our cash intake may slow down a little bit as we go through the balance of the year. anyway, it's still nonetheless a good result at this particular point in time. I now want to just move the investment report with the resolutions that are shown on the screen. Then item 2.3 is our monthly finance report for January. So this is not our 6 monthly report. That was reported last month. This is the January, so this is 7 months report, so it can't be compared to the quarterly report, which finishes, of course, at the end of December. So, Mr. Farmer, I think this, again, things are travelling pretty well.
Yes, actually, after the month of December, which was the first month of the year where council actually performed worse than its budget estimates, January has reversed that and shown a net $3.3 million better than anticipated or budgeted result for the month. And that means a continuation of council being ahead of its budget, which has been in place since early in the year. And in fact, at this point in time, we're $42 million better than at the same time last year on actual figures. And I think that's a pretty remarkable turnaround in 7 months. That's for 7 months of the year. So in January last year, we were in a $42 million $42 million worse position. And interestingly enough, that's reflected, you can see the salaries and wages number was at the same time last year, 117,200,000. And this year it's 95,841,000. So that's about a $21.4 million improvement on your salaries and wages over the first 7 months of the year, which is an 18% improvement, reduction in actual costs. And if you take into account there is a 2.5% award increase in that model, it's actually a 20.7% reduction in costs. So I do see reports in some media and in social media that suggests that council's salaries and wages costs are blowing out. In fact, they're in real terms, over 20% less than they were at the same time last year. One factor that I mentioned in the Q2 report is that capital expenditure is lagging, largely due to the impacts from COVID, both due to local resources and supply chains internationally. So that's something we're going to have to keep an eye on. Ultimately, that's a timing issue. The resources are allocated to deliver those projects, but there are a range of factors that are constraining our ability to deliver our major capital works on time. We'll be working very hard to get that back on track as soon as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Farmer. As I said, I think it's been a great effort by the organisation to actually do this turnaround, and I have to compliment the whole organisation for the discipline in doing this. Would I be right in saying, Mr. Farmer, that the slight anomaly that you mentioned for the month of December and so on, where we had this, I think it was the small loss, or was it December or January? I can't remember. No, it was December, wasn't it? It was December. That's really more due to the actual budget and the forecast of what we actually had in our budget, the timings there. If we got that a little bit more accurate, then in fact you wouldn't see that.
Yeah, look, December was driven by a number of factors, but you may have been aware that there was a worldwide computer virus. I can't remember what the code was, but our time and attendance system, Kronos, was taken out for about 6 weeks, and that meant that some of the costing that would have gone to capital ended up going to operational, and so that worsened the December figure, and that's now been washed out in January and will be washed out in February. So the backward figure in December may well have been a little bit overstated,
Yeah.
But December still was closer to budget or a little bit worse than budget, whereas every other month this year we've been performing better than budget.
No, that's good, and that's a good explanation. Look, the one thing I would say, and I'll say at this time, I know that I have a strong interest in finance, and the CEO is a trained accountant, and our CFO is doubly trained as an accountant, whatever that means. It is important for any council to keep focused on how the P&L is travelling. It's also terribly important to keep focused on the cash position. And I know I've said this a number of times, but every month that I'm here, and I certainly hope into the future, the community and the councillors in the future will look at the two charts. One is the chart that Ms Cowley showed. The other is the chart that is normally in the monthly financial report, which is just the P&L, which shows the month's position, the year-to-date position, and the forecasted year-end position. And if people just keep track of that, then they can actually see how the council's progressing, both from a cash point of view and from an income and an expenditure point of view. So I'll just make those comments now because it is important that council spend time on that and not kind of arguing with each other. So with that, I'm going to resolve to adopt the resolution that is disclosed on the screen, that we note the monthly financial reports for January 2022. Now I move to item 2.4, adoption of the public forum policy, which I do want to consider with the following item 2.5, which is the code of meeting practice. They are separated, and I note that in the responses to the consultation when we had the code of meeting practice out, people were concerned that we were dropping off the public forum. I can assure the community there's nothing further from the truth. What we're doing is trying to make it more convenient to put the public forum structure into a policy which the council can change easily. Whereas the code of meeting practice has to go out on exhibition for 42 days before any changes can be made as a result of that. In any case, a new council coming in must, according to the legislation, within the first 12 months, review the code of meeting practice. So what we're putting in place now really applies through till the next election, whenever that might be. I can assure the community that there will be the public forum attached to it, but the way it is structured is via a separate policy, which, as I say, the council can change, whereas the code of meeting practice requires a lot of consultation. So with that, I'm going to just firstly tick off the adoption of the public forum policy. So I'll now resolve to adopt the public forum policy that is provided in attachment 1. Now, the code of meeting practice, we did get a lot of comments in a range of other areas. And I suppose, just I guess given that there were up to 50 odd comments, I was surprised that no one wanted to comment on it at the meeting, but nonetheless, they were comments that did make sense. And we have sort of addressed a couple, as I said. We have addressed the policy for the public forum. One area in the code of meeting practice which I felt we could do better with was questions with notice, which I note for the previous council we're at 4 months to take before a reply would come back by the council, our papers. I have to say, I found that time frame totally unreasonable. It was put to me in the code, as you will see, the draft code, that be reduced to 2 months. As we've gone to monthly meetings, I see no reason why the response cannot be in the following council meeting. So in other words, 1 month later at the next ordinary meeting, I expect to see that. So I'm going to add that as a fourth recommendation, that we do make sure that we change that so that it's done in 1 month as opposed to the 2 months that's currently there. So I have to say, with the change to a monthly thing, we are actually following the practices that most councils, again, are adopting and moving that way. I certainly have the view that council should really only meet once a month. We have to remember that it is a meeting in front of the public. It is not a public meeting. And we do have the capacity to do extraordinary meetings if deemed necessary by both the Mayor and General Manager. Really, the problem with the fortnightly meetings is the staff go on a merry-go-round. They no sooner finish one meeting than they're right back looking at papers and doing things for the next meeting. They don't have time to sit down and think about the next big policy issues. And I have to say, I'm hoping that there will be a lot more looking at some of these policy issues into the future as we move into monthly meetings. More importantly, with the introduction of regional planning panels and local planning panels, there are no longer DAs coming to council. So the time taken up by them has changed dramatically. We're now getting approximately, we've been averaging 7 items per month. If we go to monthly, we're going to be running at about 14, which is equivalent to what tonight's agenda looks like. I think that's entirely reasonable and sensible. As I said, a new incoming council has the ability to change this if they so desire. But I have to say, monthly meetings does allow staff more time to focus on other things and hopefully provide a better service, such as the questions on notice, etc., and to actually get on to major policy decisions. So with that, I'm going to resolve the resolutions that are shown on the screen. If we just flick down to number 4, hopefully, we'll see that the includes an amendment to require responses to questions without notice to be provided at the next meeting. So I've added that one in. Now, item 2.6 is the revised council meeting dates. So following that resolution, we will now move the meeting dates to reflect that. So that we have put the meeting dates in there from March to December 2022. And we have in fact amended, I think, or we're going to amend the number 2, because that, as it reads, suggests that we believe that there's going to be an election in 2022. I have to say we have no such knowledge, so I just want to make sure that we're not in any way suggesting that. So I think we have now the new motion there now up on the screen, which is different to the one that was in the printed papers. And you'll note that the schedule will require amendment if the local government election for the Central Coast is announced in 2022. And that then would be provided by way of a further report to council. So with that, I will move the recommendations and adopt the recommendations as shown on the screen. We now move to item 2.7, which is we have made available to the public the work that was done by some consultants for us as part of the process of looking at the structural review of the water and sewer business. And it's worthy, I think, for me to spend a little time just talking about some of the issues that are there. And hopefully, the community can follow some of the issues that we're currently facing. The fundamental issue that is present is that under the accounting practices that local government has to operate under, we must consolidate the results of the water, sewer and drainage business into our overall accounts. In doing that, we are assessed as a water authority against the Water Management Act. And IPART judges us against the Water Management Act and against the other water authorities which operate as water management authorities. So the fundamental problem is in the fact that we have to consolidate. There's been a lot of talk about the solution I've seen in the media, and people mention to me when I go about, that bringing forward what was originally proposed some years ago, the Central Coast Water Corporation, I have to say is not the answer. That was designed initially when there was two councils and they wanted to bring the two authorities together into one. Now, I'm speculating, but the likely understanding was, following a range of other work that needed to be done both in the governance and financial area, each council would probably end up with something like a 50% shareholding, which, if they'd done some of their pre-parts correctly, then they may have been able to account for it on an equity basis, which simply means you're not having to do a range of things that we're required to do currently, but we only have to show the income and the expenditure of that we received for our 50% shareholding. So now that we are one council, it actually rules that out because one council has 100% ownership of it. So that model is no longer a solution that is available to us unless, as one of the proposals as put by KPR in that consultant's report, is there's a change in legislation which enables us to work in a different way. Some of the areas I just want to point out as to where the Water Management Act and the Local Government Act and IPART don't synchronise. One of the first things is that IPART have a unique way of setting the asset valuation for water authorities, such as Sydney Water and Hunter Water. It's referred to as the RAB, the Rateable Asset Base. Now, this is a number that is calculated via IPART. Local government has to carry the assets at their full book value. That means if I compare the two for the moment, the local government valuation for water and sewer and drainage assets, the net value is $3.78 billion. Compared to the RAB valuation used by IPART, they value our assets at $1.4 billion. Now, I've heard people express recently in the media that selling this would solve all our problems. I've made it clear I won't sell it. And my principal reason behind it is because of, in those two numbers lies the problem. If, and there's only two organisations that could potentially purchase it, Sydney Water and Hunter Water, they could pay no more than the RAB value. Because that's what IPART say it's worth from an asset base, and bear in mind, IPART judge the return on that asset base that a water authority is allowed to make and take as profit, which is what the SOEs do. That would mean this council would have to have a book loss of approximately $2.4 billion. And whoever did that would be creating the biggest fire sale ever, I suspect, in any council history, and probably well into the future, because we would be selling community assets that have been built out over a long period of time, decades, with a valuation in our books of 3.78, and we get paid 1.4, and we have to show a book loss, not a cash loss, a book loss of $2.4 billion. That is not an option, and I certainly won't consider that in anything going forward. As I say, that would be the fire sales of all time. Now, under the Water Management Act, as the Auditor General pointed out, SOEs can treat their water and sewer reserves as unrestricted cash and can interborrow at will between water and sewer, compared to the Council, which under the Local Government Act must keep them separated as externally restricted reserves, with no capacity to interborrow without ministerial approval. And the net result of that is an SOE, which we are compared to, a Sydney Water and a Hunter Water, have a different set of working capital to play with, or unrestricted cash to play with, compared to a council. If we look at the depreciation difference, the Local Government Act, if we have a grant for, say, 50 million, just say, for example, for a pipeline, under local government accounting, we take that asset on its book value, at its cost, generally speaking, and then we depreciate it in the depreciation line in the out years, which is added to our costs. IPART do not allow that calculation to take place, so they do not allow us to depreciate a grant. So clearly, our asset renewal ratios and other things get impacted because under the Local Government Act, which we have to consolidate under, forces us down a particular track. And as I said, you know, the Auditor-General started off this process by making the recommendation that OLG needed to resolve the issue of unrestricted cash from water and sewer versus the restricted cash, and clarifying that as compared to from the Water Management Act compared to the Local Government Act. We had to clarify that. So there are these issues out there, and that's not all of them. But the net result of all of that is IPART, when they're comparing our costs, it's not a fair comparison. Now, when I was trawling through some things, there is a report that's out from IPART now, which is publicly available, which is a review of the domestic waste management charges. And in that, IPART are suggesting that perhaps they should look at the wide variation that occurs with councils in their domestic waste charge, and perhaps understand some of the reasons behind that. They're recommending that they propose to publish annually a benchmark waste peg to assist councils in setting their domestic waste management charges, and they would publish that at the same time as they publish the rate peg for the general rate. They propose to publish annually a report on the extent to which councils' annual domestic waste management charges increase more than the benchmark waste peg each year. And they're proposing that and recommending that the Office of Local Government publish pricing principles to guide councils on how they should recover the costs of providing domestic waste management. I believe with this is the potential solution, certainly in my view, a good candidate for the potential solution for our water and sewer, that it is regulated by IPART, just as they're proposing to, I guess, in some shape or format, regulate domestic waste charge. But you're being regulated against the Local Government Act, and all that requires is for the council, because that's a delegation of the council, of the minister, to IPART to do that. And all that would require then is the deletion of the Central Coast Council as a water management authority under the Water Management Act. So that way we can actually have the community can be satisfied that IPART are keeping a close watch on the pricing schedules, and that we're not gouging or anything like that, but at the same time we are not being disadvantaged by being compared to SOEs where we're trying to account for under 2 acts. The other solutions which are suggested in the KPR report are you need to change legislation in both the Water Management Act and in the Local Government Act to make it work. I believe this solution that I've just outlined might be a better way to go through it. So I'm going to actually now resolve to adopt some slightly different resolutions to those that are printed. I want to note that the recommendation from the Audit Office of New South Wales report on Local Government 2020 that OLD should clarify that legal framework relating to the restrictions. That we note the report on the structural review of the water and sewer business, which outlines 3 options, which take into account changes in legislation, which the council can't control, only the government can change the legislation. And that we note IPART's draft report on the review of the domestic waste management charges. And I'm going to authorise the CEO to investigate those options that are listed in both reports, as well as any other options that he or his staff may identify as part of this analysis to go forward. I hope that explanation suggests 2 things, principally why it is not a good idea to sell water and sewer, and secondly, why we have to move out of the current regime where we are now, which, as I said, has been triggered by the Audit Office of New South Wales requesting OLG to start to look at this. So we've done some work, KPR have done some work, and as I said, IPART have actually done some work as well. So somewhere in there, I think an answer can be generated. Now, I think I've moved those recommendations. So certainly I will move those recommendations if I hadn't and adopt them as decisions of council. Item 2.8, which is variations to development standards for the period October to December 2021. There's nothing controversial in there. The majority have just gone straight through. So I propose to just adopt the resolution, which is to note that report on variations to development standards October to December 2021. Item 2.9, outcomes of public exhibition of the Central Coast Destination Management Plan 22 to 25. Ms Cowley, I know you've got carriage of tourism and so on inside the organisation. You might like just to speak to that, because we've actually done quite well, I think, in terms of awards and things of late, which I think we can be pretty proud of.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. We'll put a little slide which contains 5 pages, which will help go through some of the information that we want to cover through the destination management plan. And while the team are getting this report presents a record of the outcomes of the community consultation on the draft Central Coast Destination Management Report for 2022-25, which was resolved by Council on 23rd of November 2021, and to present to Council so we have to present to Council with the final Central Coast Destination Management Report for adoption. The purpose of this Destination Management Plan is to establish a shared vision and shared goals for the Central Coast visitor economy. As the Administrator said, tourism is an important pillar in our local economic and employment sectors, and coming out of COVID, we have updated the region's strategic priorities to the long-term management of the sector, which balances community needs and protects our environment. Thank you. We'll go to the next page, and that shows the community consultation that was undertaken between the 25th of November and 22nd of December. The plan was shared with industry stakeholders and the Central Coast community through both the Central Coast Council and Love Central Coast owned channels. There were over 324 page views on yourvoiceourcoast.com with 139 downloads of the plan, which is great. There were a total of 10 submission forms received, and the submissions were received by industry and community members. What we heard was that protection and sustainability of our natural environment is vital. Heritage and Aboriginal culture is important to recognise and understand. The activities proposed create a unique identity for the coast, support local initiatives, and are optimistic and forward thinking. That collaboration between operators and council is important. The transport and connectivity need to be a focus, and visitation should be managed alongside the need of locals. Thank you. In terms of the community consultation, the feedback from the submissions was noted and responded to with the below changes to the final plan. There was a more prominent inclusion of references to the Central Coast Cultural Plan 2020-2025, which notes the strategic goal for the Aboriginal people's voices are heard and they lead custodianship of their culture. We reviewed and corrected all references to the New South Wales National Parks and Wildlife Services for consistencies, and we included a reference to the Summersby Falls Visitor Precinct upgrade in Brisbane Water National Park. Some feedback has also been shared with other relevant council teams for consideration in their work, including the strategic planning team. And finally, as the administrator mentioned, on to the next slide. Thank you. I am immensely proud of our marketing and tourism team who have propelled our region onto the world stage with a powerful Destination Central Coast brand that heroes locals, local products, and our spectacular natural environment. In a relatively short time, since beginning the tourism marketing and management function in-house in July 2020, Council has received the following accolades, including winning the Bronze Award in the Local Government Award for Tourism category at the New South Wales Tourism Awards in 2021, winning a spot for the Central Coast as the only New South Wales destination named in Green Destinations International 2021 Top 100 Destination Sustainability Stories list, and winning the most compelling itinerary for the Ettalong Town Centre, being named a finalist in the New South Wales Top Tourism Town Awards 2021 for Terrigal and Tukli, and seeing the entrance named a finalist in What If's Aussie Town of the Year Awards. We look forward to working together with business and industry to continue the momentum and deliver on the next 4 years of activities to ensure that the Central Coast remains in the visitor economy spotlight. Thank you, Mr. Administrator.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Cowley. Look, I have to say, that slide's pretty impressive, thinking from where we've come from. And as I said, to actually be on a world stage in particularly the green category there, I think is again outstanding, and testament to, I guess, what this area is all about. It is a fabulous area, and it's great to see, A, we're getting recognition for it, and B, the fact that the strategy, I think, has found pretty common agreement amongst the operators out there. The feedback was pretty good. We didn't need to change very much, and it's looking like, everybody is working together, and it is one of the, I guess, a good example, probably one of our best examples of actually working with business out there to actually, when I say grow the dollars coming into the area, which of course creates employment, which of course stops people having to drive and leave the area. So it's a win-win-win-win type situation. So I'm delighted that we've brought it to this position. So I will now move the recommendations that are shown on the screen, and as in to finally adopt the final Central Coast Destination Management Plan 2022 to 2025. Item 2.10, which is the submission to the public exhibition of the draft Central Coast Regional Plan 2041. So a little extended time frame compared to the tourism one, or destination marketing one. But Mr. Milliken, your team have put together a wide range of recommendations and so on here, which I have to say I'm strongly in agreement with. But you may like to just talk through some of the process and so on there.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. And there are some slides which will go up already. There we go. So yes, the Central Coast Region Plan has a 2041 time horizon. If we go to the first slide, so each region of New South Wales has the Department of Planning and Environment does a region plan. They always have a 20-year time horizon. So 2041 is that horizon, and they review them every 5 years. So that's why this is a review of the 2036 version, and it's on public exhibition at the moment for comments from not just council, but from anybody in the community who wishes to do so. And the link to the paper, the link to the report or the plan is in the council papers. So this region plan, as I mentioned, will replace the 2036 version, but it also replaces the North Wyong Shire structure plan, which is, as you can see, quite an old structure plan for the development of the northern part of the Wyong Shire. Next slide, please. So one of the items we agree with in the region plan that they've introduced is this, what they're calling the Urban Development Program. And that really seeks to address one of the key issues that we experience, that the land rezoning and the infrastructure provisioning aren't always done in sequence. Central Coast has a lot of smaller land parcels, and there's not always good coordination on how they're released. So this program will be supported by a collaborative governance process, so an urban development committee will be formed with the council along with relevant stakeholder bodies, and we'll develop an infrastructure first and a place-based delivery framework. So really getting that sequencing in order, which will help once land's rezoned. It will help that the next phases of development happen in a more orderly manner. Most importantly, making sure they're serviced with infrastructure. The next slide up on the screen shows that the 7 objectives of the new Central Coast Region Plan, and really around these important themes that the department think are most relevant for the Central Coast for the next 20 years of our growth. A lot of that is around our neighbourhoods and planning for our active and vibrant neighbourhoods, as well as economic self-determination for our Aboriginal communities, and really connecting the connectivity, getting jobs connected to where the jobs are connected to where our people are. On the next slide, some of the major comments, so I won't go through them all, but just some of the major highlights. Employment land, the new region plan identifies a significant amount of new land to be zoned for employment land. We already have a significant amount of employment land zoned across the Central Coast. A lot of that is unserviced. So rather than go and rezone more and more land for employment use that will have impact on the environment, we think a better outcome would be to service that already zoned industrial land and get that zoned land onto the market. Similarly, or not dissimilarly, with residential land, we know there's sufficient land already identified in the region plan to accommodate the forecast growth for the Central Coast. There's no justification for rezoning land west of the M1, and comments about that in the region plan are really misleading. That land is important for our water supply. It's important agricultural land, and it's really difficult to service. It's a long way from the development front, so getting services out there is quite expensive. So we don't think there's any justification for that. On the next slide, what they're calling the Karagi growth area, Karagi being the Aboriginal place name for the entrance, and talks about the area of the entrance Long Jetty and Batto Bay. We know there's significant traffic constraints through Long Jetty, and we don't want to promote further development in that area until, at a minimum, those traffic issues are planned for resolution. Development in this area should be really focused on the entrance. We want to support the growth of the economy of the entrance town to make it continue it as a vibrant and dynamic town centre. So Council's view is that is where any development in that area should be focused. One of the issues mentioned in the previous paper around destination management was around transport planning, and we know transport is a major planning issue for the Central Coast. It's a beautiful environment, but we have lakes and we have biodiverse areas that we need to get around, and that makes transport challenging. The plan doesn't talk about transport, and we looked at similar region plans such as the Illawarra Shoalhaven, and they have a whole chapter and real particular objectives around transport planning. So we think that's a missing element of the transport strategy of the region plan. That transport strategy needs to be included into it. For example, it provides no clarity about the future of the Warrnambool Town Centre train station. It's been talked about for years, but we have no clarity as to whether it will actually go ahead. or whether it will not, and that has direct impacts on the planning for the Warnervale area. On the next slide, talks about separating Tuggerah and Wyong into two separate centres, with Tuggerah becoming a strategic centre and Wyong remaining or staying as what they're calling a local centre. We feel that Tuggerah and Wyong have a really symbiotic relationship. They work well with each other. Tuggerah being, that commercial centre with a large Westfield shopping centre, and Wyong being much more of your residential area with that, Main Street service commercial function. We think they should be spoken about as one group rather than split into two separate things. And that would be consistent with our Tuggerah and Wyong corridor strategy. The plan talks about Central Lakes Planning District, which covers the northern part of the Central Coast and the southern part of Lake Macquarie. We think that's a good idea. We think that both councils should continue to work really strongly together, and that area is really important to both councils. So coordinated planning is a good idea. But we need to make sure there's a good framework for that coordination, so it's not just talked about, that it's actually done properly, and that's a suggestion that we think should be included in the region plan. On the next slide, just a couple of final points. Biodiversity. We know biodiversity is a key issue on the Central Coast. When rezonings come across, the biodiversity almost invariably is the issue, and it should be. It's an important element of our environment and why people choose to live on the Central Coast. But we think there's a lack of distinction between biodiversity and general open space areas. We think they haven't really thought through the regional biodiversity connection. It does go across agricultural land, and we need to make sure that there's that right balance between those biodiversity corridors and the other functions of non-urban land. The plan doesn't contain, finally, biodiversity. It needs to be addressed early in the rezoning process, and that's really related to the next paper as well on the rezoning process. Addressing issues up front makes the rezoning process much easier. The plan doesn't contain any population and employment projections, which we think is a shortfall. In the previous plan, it talked about what our projections are going to be, so we know what we're planning for. I think that's an important element that needs to be included. And finally, it talks about a minimum residential density of 50 to 75 dwellings per hectare. That's really quite, medium density development. And there are, areas of the Central Coast where low density development is appropriate and is what should be developed. So we think having that minimum residential density doesn't really consider, the realities of the urban areas of the Central Coast. So the next steps, the Central Coast Region Plan is on exhibition until the 4th of March. There are a series of recommendations that are in Council's business paper tonight, and if those recommendations are resolved, we will prepare a submission to the Department of Planning and Environment on that basis. But I would also encourage, as I said at the start, all members of the community to read the plan and to provide their own submissions into the Department of Planning. Thank you, Mr. Administrator.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Milliken. It's a very, very good summary of the Central Coast Regional Plan, the draft plan. In essence, I think the document is a much better attempt by the state government, I believe, to actually, and they've got a lot of things, I think, basically right. But as you have clearly pointed out, there's some areas where I think they're off target, and I have to say, I'm delighted that you've picked up some of the things where I have been getting feedback, and that is absolutely no development is being supported for west of the M1. And fundamentally, when we've got land on the east side and spare capacity, as you point out, with the industrial lands and so on, it's clear that we could actually do an awful lot more and well within the timeframes that this plan covers. So I'm very pleased to see that and those things that you've brought out and your staff have brought forward to this. So I'm not going to reiterate all of this, but I have to say it's a good effort, and I think I feel very comfortable in recommending that these recommendations go forward to to DPE and see what they will adopt for us. So with that, I am going to move the resolutions that are shown on them and resolve to adopt them as a decision of council. The next paper is submission 2.11, submission to the public exhibition of DPE, not DPI no more, they've disappeared, to DPE's new approach to rezonings. So do you just want to briefly summarise our submission to that?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Administrator. Yes, the Department of Planning and Environment have put on public exhibition a new, what they're calling a discussion paper for a new approach to rezonings. So what we call planning proposals at the moment. Rezonings are a type of planning proposal that seek to change the zone of land. And they're a really important process. They set what the planning rules are for the whole local government area. They write into the LEP what the zones are, what the development requirements are. So they're a really important process and quite rightly attract a lot of community attention. It's really important that we have a clear rezoning process that people understand, but also while having a timely and relatively fast rezoning process, it's important that having good planning decisions made through that process are achieved. So we need a process, a rezoning process that works for everybody, that works for councils, that works for people who want to provide submissions into that process, and works for proponents as well. So we all know what we're talking about with rezonings. So the discussion paper has a number of proposed changes which are up on the screen at the moment. Some of them are good changes. Some of them will lead to a improved clarity of the rezoning process and a better understanding. Some of the proposals are less good and may lead to resourcing and quality of decision-making impacts for local governments. If we go on to the next slide, compares. It's not easy to see, but on the left it has the current rezoning framework. And as you can see, there's a lot of arrows and a lot of boxes going on all different directions. The proposed rezoning framework is on the right, and you can see it's a much more clear process, much more straightforward, and hopefully will lead to better understanding by everybody who wants to participate in the process of what that process is. So that's a good thing. Having a clearer planning process is a good thing. However, there are some issues with the proposed rezoning process, and overall, I guess we support the aim of rezoning, of improving the efficiency and improving the clarity of the process. That's a good thing. One of the changes is to have early government agency involvement in rezoning processes, and we support that. And one of the challenges we have is getting other government departments, transport and whatnot, to participate in the rezoning process in a timely manner, and having them involved early will certainly make things clearer and faster. One of the things that Central Coast Council does is a pre-lodgement process for any planning proposal that comes in. So we are able to talk to proponents about what is required, what information they need to provide, and what standard of information is important for a council to be able to consider a proposed rezoning. So that can be things like making sure that if you're coming in with a greenfield rezoning proposal, that you have all your biodiversity requirements sorted out at the start, so that we're not on the hop trying to do that during the rezoning process. So Central Coast Council already has that. The proposed change mandates it, which we certainly support, but having a direct link between that pre-lodgement and the actual rezoning application is important. We don't want to give information on one rezoning and then get a different rezoning in altogether and have to work with that. One of the significant issues, and probably the most significant issue with the proposed process, is when a rezoning application comes in, council will have 7 days to put that on exhibition, regardless of whether it's a good proposal or not. Every planning proposal will have to go on exhibition. that really removes that strategic merit test. So at the moment, a rezoning or a planning proposal comes in, we test it against our strategies to make sure it's in line with what we want to achieve. The proposed process removes that, which we think is an issue. Some other suggested improvements is making sure there's sufficient lead-in time for exhibitions. 7 days is simply not enough. It takes more than 7 days to get ads into the local media and those sort of things. So we need to make sure there's sufficient lead-in time. And also a stop-the-clock mechanism. So if we need further information or there's a change to the proposal, we're able to stop the clock and we're not under the countdown from the state government to make a decision. We think an improvement could be to involve the local planning panel in that rezoning decision-making process, and they could be really useful in that strategic merit test of having an independent assessment of that strategic merit. And we think the focus should really be on resourcing the planning system, resourcing local government, and having a good review process rather than having appeal mechanisms or what they call a planning guarantee, where proponents will get their fees back if a decision isn't made in time. So whilst there are some good elements of the proposed rezoning process, there is one significant issue with it and a number of suggestions that council can make to improve that process. So this one is on exhibition until Monday the 28th, which is next Monday. It's an exhibition being run by the Department of Planning and Environment, so it's not our proposal. It is open for public exhibition for anybody in the community who wishes to read it and provide a comment, and I'd encourage anyone interested to do so. And similarly to the last item, a number of recommendations are made to council tonight, and if they are adopted, council will make a submission to DPE on that basis. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Milliken. Yes, once again, it's a very full explanation, and I think it's well worthy to actually do that because people who are listening in, and perhaps people in the gallery, a lot of the stuff sort of flies through and doesn't get fully understood. Again, I think the state government is actually trying to do the right thing, trying to sort of speed processes up and get answers out there and take potentially some cost out of the whole process. But again, they push the limits, and I have to say some of those points that you've made there, particularly the 7 days, I think is going to be a pretty tough one for councils. And also I think this new process will be pretty resource intensive, and most councils are struggling to find resources to be able to do this. So it's all very well imposing some systems, but if we can't get the resources to be able to do it, and more importantly, we've got to be able to pay for those resources, then it becomes a bit of a difficult situation. But nonetheless, I think it's been a good job, and I fully support all those suggestions that we're going to put forward in our response to DPE. And with that, I'm going to move those recommendations and make those as a decision of council. Item 2.12, Community Support Grant Program, the period December 2021 to January 2022. These comes up periodically. We have a budget overall, I think, of some 300,000, and periodically we're assessing against that. This time we've got a relatively small number. It's only 23,000, but again, they seem worthy applicants, and we certainly don't want to get in between the worthy applicants and their money. So with that, I will move with alacrity and move the recommendations that are shown on the screen and make those as a decision of council. Item 2.13, which is the Audit, Risk and Improvement Committee recruitment. Our policy requires that it requires rotation of members of the ARIC, and Mr. Gordon's appointment actually comes up for the end of his period, and he now has to retire from the committee. So he will retire from the committee after the next Audit and Risk Committee, which I think is set down for March this year. So he will have to retire after that by virtue of our policy, and this paper is there for me to approve the fact that we go out to select a further person for a new Audit, Risk and Improvement Committee independent external member as set out in the report. And it's very, very important that we do have good external members on that committee because they do provide some good advice to the council, and certainly Mr. Gordon has provided very good advice. I've worked with Mr. Gordon for, I'm guessing the best part of nearly 15 years now in audit committees over various councils, and he has certainly established himself as one of the top members of committees, and even at this late stage of life, and I know he's looking forward to actually being able to do a little less, but he's still on 12 committees, which include actually state risk and audit and risk committees as well for state departments, for example, Department of Education. So he's hugely in demand. Be sad to see him go. He's been on a great job, but nonetheless, the policy is the policy, and we will move on to select a new person. So with that, I'd also like to thank John for his services over the past 2, 3, I think it's more than that, 4 years he might have been here, has he, in total? Whatever the time is. Thank him for that time. He's been a major contributor, and he keeps people on their toes, and wish him well in the future. With that, brings us to a conclusion of this ordinary meeting. So I will close the meeting at 7:50 p.m. Thank you. Bid you all good night.